is here that is here. Just a gentle reminder that after the talk this evening there's a bar. We do encourage you to go to the bar because it's raising funds for the MFA. So it'd be great. I have the absolute privilege of presenting the final lecture for the postgraduate taught lecture series this academic year, and even bigger pleasure of introducing Dr. Nicky Coutts. I'm sure some of you have been reading around Nicky Coutts' biography. My name's Elle, by the way. I think some of you in the room know who I am. So I'm very interested in how do we hold the spaces of the institution, in brackets, to account, and engage in forms of critical thinking while preserving a sense of self in what are often spaces loaded with systems of and even against our own experiences. How do we create spaces of dreaming, resilience, resistance, nourishment, and collective democracies, as well as develop the tools to bring our own and others' knowledges into these spaces of artistic learning? And I think for me it's essential not to lose sight of one's own queerness, to consider the decoloniality amidst broader discussions, to reconnect and contextualise these concepts through embodied practices, which are the core of many of our approaches, as is collaboration. So, Dr. Nicky Coutts is a renowned scholar holding a position at Glasgow School of Art as research lead, has completed several publications in groundbreaking work that explores the intersections of affect, archives, and queer theory. Her research engages through the lived experience, through observation, emotions, and these are preserved and represented, particularly in relation to marginalised histories. Author of the influential books Queereal Secretions, Artistic Research as Exquisite Practice, which I think there are a couple of copies over there. Coutts challenges conventional notions of archiving, proposing alternative approaches that embrace the ephemeral, the personal, and the affective. Her scholarship is an invention and an invitation to rethink how we document, engage with queer histories, offering transformative insights into the power of archives to shape collective memory and cultural discourse. I believe we've had a number of lectures, this term in particular, that have looked at practice around sustainability, extractivism, processes of ecologies, and I think this is a good fitting final lecture that brings some of these themes together, but within a slightly different context around embodied practices, collaboration and collectivity. I think it's also a moment for, I mentioned dreamings. I'm very interested at the moment in dreamings when we're in such precarious and difficult position. So there are a number of publications that I think Nicky recommended that all have dreaming and resilience at their core. So, Nicky, over to you.
Thanks very much, Elle. And thanks for inviting me. Can you hear me? Is there? It's working. It is working. And also just to add to Elle's intro, I'm an artist, so I'm very much going to be speaking as an artist today, as well as an academic.
We can't hear you at the back.
You can't hear me at the back.
Your mic might be muted. Unmute the...
If we just press
Oh.
the little button.
It's because my mic is attached behind me. Sorry. Good start. It was in my cardigan. Is that better? Yeah. Conquered the tech. Good. I was just saying I was an artist. Curious that the microphone was off at that minute, but so I'm going to be speaking from that perspective today, talking a lot about practice. I've also actually written this lecture out. Unfortunately, I'm suffering from a bit of a fatigue syndrome at the moment, so I tend to forget who I am and what I'm talking about. So I've written it all out. Sorry about that. I know it's harder to listen when people are reading, but I'll try and kind of come up for air every so often to keep you hopefully with me. Okay, so this lecture is aimed at thinking through the multiple possibilities, even infinite capacities of research and practice and research. As Finlay McKinley relates here in a zine that fabulates his queer fantasies and survival strategies. Research and practice is being approached by thinking through queer methods and queer materials, queer to the broadest extent of what we might understand by the term, queer as a resistant set of tools and a means to live that works against the demands of a straight and straightening world. So the plan is to talk through a few examples of work that have contributed to the Research Network Queer Materialities at the Glasgow School of Art, of which I'm part. And anyway, Els told you a little bit more about what I do there. And to follow that with some examples from my own practice. So you can see here the Glasgow School of Art. I'm just sort of showing you the environment within which we operate, but we have quite a few research networks in the School of Fine Art. A lot of them are around social justice, of which Queer Materialities is one. So this is a sort of overview of the kind of scope of what people are interested in there. It's a very active, sort of mainly practice-led environment. In Decolonising the Literature Review, a relational approach, Laurentinen and Michelle Bishop argue that research begins with one's relationship with people, places and knowledge. So this is the main focus of today, to ask you to think about who or what your travelling companions are when you make your work. How does your relationship with people, places, and maybe particularly knowledges form a constellation with which your work is able to activate and question? Who is your kin in these globally complex times? How might you describe your communities of making? In answering those questions on who your travelling companions might be, likely they do not derive from theory and theorists alone. More likely you make alongside, think, materialise with other artists, with other disciplines, issues, with friends, in relation to family perhaps, objects, memories, sensory experience, or with more than human companions, as I do. So this presentation is about these connections. It isn't anti-theory, far from it, but it does foreground recognition of the people, places and knowledges we engage with as crucial to what we're able to say or convey through the work that we make. So I first wanted to say a word about the book list that I put together for today, photographed on my bathroom floor. None of them are strictly what you might think of as academic or theoretical texts, but all of them share a doubt, and all of them share a doubt in the ability of conventional academic forms or structures to speak on subject matters and identities disadvantaged by straightening ideologies of societal and political power. You could say they operate queerly, sidestepping and swerving straightening effects. Instead, they're all invested in extending, expanding and experimenting both with language and with existing ontologies. Often the author creates a kind of ambidextrous, symbiotic approach to subject matter that acknowledges autobiographical input. So not on the bathroom floor, but could have been, is the book Essayism by the writer Brian Dillon, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, in which he describes his lifelong battle with depression, thinking and writing through his thoughts and experiences of depression, not only in his own life, but in those of other literary figures. He's able to reflect more meaningfully on the essay form, and through that, the contribution of depression to literature. So I'll just say something incredibly brief about each of these books and why it's here in the context of us thinking together about the bodies we practice with and our methods and structures working with them. So first, Noreen Masood, who describes herself as a gay woman of Pakistani and British descent. Her 2023 book, A Flat Place, is a memoir exploring the flat experience of complex PTSD and literally flat physical environments within the UK, from Morecambe Bay to the Orkney Islands. Masood grew up in Lahore in Pakistan in a house and situation she never felt entirely safe in part due to an overbearing father who rarely let Masood and her siblings go outside, and moved to the UK with her Scottish mother when her father disowned her at the age of 16. She's been described as an author who works with the fundamental impossibility of words, with colonial trauma, with being always on the outside. In A Flat Place, she accepts the queer work of challenging the inadequacies of language and sets out on a journey of compounded flatness, her travelling companions, her own interior traumatised psychological state, and the physicality of this series of low-lying places, each embodying the other throughout the text. And as for Brian Dillon's essayism and the role of depression within his thinking and writing, Masood better relates to flat places through her PTSD and to her PTSD through her travels within flat terrains. So sharing a few qualities with Masood and her writing is science journalist Sabrina Imbler, and their memoir, though they don't call it one exactly, My Life in Sea Creatures, on their own life and the lives of the sea creatures they research. Imbler identifies as non-binary and mentions frequently in this book coming to terms with the fit of their own body and sexuality, while reflecting on what it is to have a Chinese mother and a white American father growing up in contemporary America. They're writing stories beautifully the margins of what is available as knowledge of the largely unknown inhabitants of the oceans. In a chapter titled Swarm, Imbler explores one particular sea-dwelling community, whilst also discussing the need for LGBTQ+ individuals to find and hold on to communities of their own. So to do this, Imbler turns to the phenomenon of sulks, or jelly blobs, that float in vast numbers in the oceans, known as for jellyfish when they do this, as blooms. As individuals, these sulks have been rarely studied. It's only as a crowd, a mass, a community, that they start to attract the interests of scientists. Sulks were properly noticed when their swarms, these blooms, interfered with the water venting systems of nuclear power plants around the states. Mechanical devices were deployed to capture and crush them, spewing their minced parts back out into the ocean as supposed solution. Whereas this did kill some, Imbler points out that mostly it served to regenerate greater and greater numbers of sulks as they can reform from minuscule parts. Even in the face of violence against them, the LGBTQ+ community regenerates, creates mass, has an exuberant quality to its communities. As for the sulks, we don't disappear. In resistance, our numbers still grow and grow. Bad Words by Elise Eichinger echoes Masood's struggle with language to describe lives and experiences that seem to continually slide beyond its grasp. Eichinger was a twin who lived as a child in Vienna through the traumatic experiences of the Second World War. Her twin grew up in England and they matured apart, but this didn't stop Elise feeling she was also living the life of her twin, leaving at least two lives in two separate places. In response, she decides to use words badly, rather than try to find the right words for the experience she's trying to relay. The result is a bizarre, surreal set of stories describing scenes and sometimes family relations straddling multiple possible worlds. She writes using words almost as hosts, as exchangeable materials, to avoid what she terms misleading certainties. If anything, Eichinger strays further from the recognisable world than does Isabel Weidner in Corey Fardar's Social Mobility, which sees a non-binary, more than human struggle to pick up a literary prize. Corey is a queer, working-class immigrant with all of history working against them. Their story is plural in the narrated struggle, and plural as it isn't clear what kind of body Corey inhabits. Human, we discover, only as the reader's assumption, human only in parts. It's a truly immersive experience reading Choreograph. Weidner introduces the possibilities of what happens when you don't artificially segregate humans from other living modes of being within a writing practice, creating a universe of intimate connections that arise through allowing these various literary anti-conventions to weave. The final two books on the list include Calamities by René Gladman. Gladman is a queer artist and writer preoccupied with lines, crossings, thresholds, geographies. In this book, each essay takes a day as its point of inquiry, observing the body as it moves through time, architecture and space, gradually demanding a new logic and level of consciousness from the narrator and reader. Gladman writes as drawing and draws as writing, each accompanying and containing the other, a doubling handled in very different ways by those I've previously mentioned, in particular Imler, Massoud and Eichinger. And finally, a bit of a seminal text, which many of you will come across, Saida Hartman's Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, Intimate Histories of Riotous Black Girls, Troublesome Women and Queer Radicals. It's a book that invents a purposeful form of critical fabulation, extending scholarly engagement into unfamiliar territory. She invites the reader to engage with what she describes as a voice from nowhere, the radical lives of young black women in America at the turn of the 20th century. She writes of a past that's yet to be done and the ongoing state of emergency in which black life remains in peril, way ahead of the movement Black Lives Matters. With such scant documentary evidence of the actual lives of these young women, rather than filling this archival space with assumptions of difficult lives, now familiar approaches of poverty, powerlessness and insignificance, Hartman writes into the archive instead a story of freedom, joy, exuberance, a creative recklessness, these women's lives as imaginative experiment. So moving back to Queer Materialities, so this is the book again, I've got it here that you can have a look at. So what we do, so through a range of approaches to material engagement, the Queer Materialities Research Network counters against the adoption of dominant modes of political and societal power. It does so through foregrounding practices of making to critique or bypass such straightness as a means against which all else is measured. Whether living queer lives or approaching methods, materials and concepts queerly, this group unites in creating forums in which practice-led approaches form experiments in restoring histories of the past, present and future. So this network is inclusive and then it includes participants who identify as queer, live queer lives, and those who don't, but deploy these queer methods within their practices. It includes research staff, research students, and researchers and artists from beyond GSA, attached or not to academia. And our activities span exhibitions, as you see here. There's a couple more images of a recent show in the Annex Gallery in Glasgow, and I'm going to be talking some of the work that you can just about see here. But we also produce work on conference, sort of alternative conference live events and publications. So the first piece of work I wanted to talk about relates to that suit hanging there, and it's by Roshana Rubin Mayhew. Roshana works extensively with performance and is currently a research student at the RCA here in London. So since the start of her PhD, she's been wrestling literally with her own body, her body weight in clay, the weight she became when going through a relationship trauma when she lost a significant amount of mass and weight. Her focus is on how to stay with and negotiate the weight of adversity within life and within a research practice, how to lift and move with weight and the weighty and the conditions required to do so. Her work is both performative and ritualistic, and it resists containment. The clay-covered suit and the grubby clay-slicked mats she produces as part of her performances return and adapt, being put to different uses each time she performs. Here she is in the lecture theatre for a recent conference, Queer Materialities Live, performing a kind of anti-lecture where all the principles and furnitures, materials of a conventional lecture are literally turned inside out and upside down. Also at Queer Materialities Live, this piece, Seeing Red, by Owain Train McGilvery, is based on North Wales's only gay bar, the Three Crowns, which was destroyed by arson a decade ago. For Queer Materialities Live, his research and development materials on this bar were splayed across the lecture theatre, doused in men's cologne. Owen exhibits the material as debris, calling into question how minoritised histories and minoritised language living in the fringes find form to be remembered. In the lecture theatre, there was something disconcerting, some said triggering, about coming across these piles of what looked like discarded, abandoned trash of the type you regularly find after big gatherings in lecture theatres, and finding them to be both remnants of histories in the process of being lost and smelling of teenage boys on a night out. Seeing Red evolved to become part of an installation at Glasgow International 2024, comprising a bilingual video in Welsh and English, drawings, miscellany, scent, and red gels. Red referencing the photographic darkroom, and Seeing Red as anger, rebellion, the fire of the last pub in Wales burning down the gay bar, and protest. For Adam Casser, artist, writer, pop star, and senior tutor in contemporary art practice at the Royal College of Art here in London, one enduring relationality that he explores in his work is with his family, specifically his mother. His mother made herself responsible for Adam's coming out as gay story, for outing him before he fully had the words or chance to do this for himself. It became a lost moment in his life to tell others in his own way what he felt he was. His mother subsequently wrote her PhD thesis on her grief in having a gay son, which she took to mean the cancellation of, for example, grandchildren in her future. Despite this, he has a close relationship with her, and incidentally his brother, also gay, has children. So Adam has taken to singing duets with his mother to try and work this all through. He's decided to not know what he's doing through facilitating this. He records telephone conversations with her where she says yeah a lot, which he turns into a riff. So I'm not sure if this will play, but we'll give it a go.
Because like quite a few times while we were talking this morning about this rubbing up of emotion.
As for Ishana's work, he reuses and restages the same elements, often in his work, as a form of queer history making, as memory fabulated into future potentialities, as company, as community, as archive, but also to resist against the pressures on all queer lives of potential further erasure. Oh no, not again. What do I do? Not that one. Oh yes, that one, okay. In Cruising Utopia, the then and there of queer futurity, Jose Esteban Munoz writes, queerness is not yet here. Queerness is an ideality. Put another way, we're not yet queer, but we can feel it as the warm illumination of a horizon imbued with potentiality. We have never been queer, yet queerness exists for us as an ideality that can be distilled from the past and used to imagine a future. The future is queerness's domain. So if we were to go along with Munoz here, maybe because we're not yet queer, not yet formed, as we may desire to be, many of the research practices within queer materialities contain a quality of liveness, of time travel, of queer voicing relational qualities that are not here yet, that are in the fabric of a world yet to come. Michelle Hanna, born and based in Glasgow, who describes themselves as an artist, performer, noisemaker, photographer, and lecturer in sculpture and environment at the Glasgow School of Art. Their practice delves into the excavation and exhumation of queer dystopia through disembodied sound, post-photography, speculative text, moving image and vocal performance. Currently they're exploring the possibilities of queer consciousness through dark forest theory, non-human intelligences, parapsychology, post-digital artifacts and the boundaries of cosmic pessimism. There's a little more on dark forest theory there to give you an idea of Hannah's interests. The next three works, rather than looking towards a queer dystopian future, look at methods for reanimating queer lives from the archives in the present and projecting them into the future, lives otherwise subjected to potential historical erasure. The first of these is this performance, Lead Me While I Lead You, by GSA research student Julia Astazani and a group of close friends who have been performing with her over several years. It takes as a starting point an essay she wrote of the same type or which is published in our book here. She always begins with autofictional writing. This live critical chorus that you see here is performed as a score with excerpts repeated based on the personal sections of lesbian porn magazines from the 1980s and 1990s in the UK and the US, such as Quim and On Our Backs, without any further context. There are some phrases in Astazani's performance describing what these women do or don't want. No games, no liars, no heavy drugs, no jealousies. And others, ambiguous in whether they are describing what they want or describing themselves. Torrid, playful, aggressive, slender, ambiguous, dominant, hunky, safe. Projecting towards future embodiments of desire, these repeated wants operate like a weather system, ritualized and siphoned through the accents of an international group of amateur performers who cruise, snake and circle in the exhibition space. Julia is interested in the lack of visibility that exists in archiving lesbian lives. Her work is formed from fragments of her own experiences, interviews with archivists, scraps of WhatsApp messages from friends, which are reworked into her scripts for performance works. Another work addressing partial and scant archives of queer lives is a video work titled The Charmers by Anne Robinson, which fabulates a band formed of 17th century witches that she projects are currently on tour around the UK. The piece draws on research into the Scottish witch trials of that era, known to be amongst the most brutal in the world. During her archival investigations, Anne found scrolls recording 7 accused witches in Ayrshire, near her hometown, as not to be found, apparently fugitives, gone missing, disappeared completely from all record. From hearsay and fragments, using her own approach to critical fabulation, the work by this sci-fi folk band telling stories of accused witches, how is this going to work, has resounding relevance today in terms of proliferation of misogyny, issues of banishment, homophobia, racism, sexism and classism happening now.
We sing an air that stammers as we fly swift underground. In the waking made us witches, 7 nowhere to be found.
The Charmers, as part of Anne's tour, will be coming to the Triangle in Deptford due to this Arts Council grant. If anybody is interested in going, it's coming quite soon. Now let's try and hit the right button. Oh, yes. So Liz Murray, who some of you'll know, is currently a seminar tutor for the graduate diploma here in Fine Art. She has worked and continues to work with resistant feminist and queer communities, and was part of a protest at the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp in the 1980s. And you see here one of the protesters at the camp being dragged away. This is one of her works, reclaimed. This recent exhibition takes its title from a news cutting in the artist's own archive of materials that document the Greenham Women's Peace Camp, which lasted from 1981 to 2000. Established in resistance to militarism and nuclear proliferation, the camp became internationally renowned as the largest and most effective feminist protest since the suffrage movement. Actions at Greenham that made newspaper headlines were often large-scale. Embrace the Base in December 1982 saw over 30,000 women take part. A smaller protest in 1983 saw a group of Greenham women, in a break from the usual route to incarceration, breaking into Holloway Prison in support of other peace camp women arrested for protesting and sent down for not paying court fines. Newspapers reported on the size of holes the women had made to break in, and the embarrassment of police officers on finding a dozen women on the prison roof at dawn. Holes made in a wire fence were described as being big enough for women, suggesting there's a hole size through which men could not fit. This seems at odds with the structures of patriarchy that oppress and restrict women's behaviours. Can a hole be sexist, or is this a queer strategy of feminist activism that subverts and obstructs the channels of discrimination? On the back of this exhibition, Liz was offered a commission from the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art. She started writing letters to her past self, the protester at Greenham, and fabulating replies written back from her younger self to who she is now. In doing so, the past becomes current, it becomes animated, it lives, it has a future. Liz's PhD proposed the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp as an artefact, as a resistant community that continues on. And something slightly unexpected happened, you could say, complete by chance at the Queer Materiality live event. The appearance of a particular material, what we began to discuss as a queer material, hair, which appears coincidentally in at least 3 of the artists' work that were on show there. So here we have a couple of images from a series of drawings and collages by Liz Murray, where the beards of well-known white male writers and philosophers, D.H. Lawrence on the left and Giorgio Agamben here on the right, are formed from women's pubic hair, forming head hair and beards in a critique of gendered power and stories of origin. So the title is Sons, not fathers or patriarchs of knowledge. This hairy theme continued with a piece by a postgraduate lecturer at GSA, Jane Topping's work Hair Shit. At the Queer Materialities live conference, these wraps that look a little like coat wraps instead contained hair clippings, were left all over the lecture theatre for people to pick up and unravel. Jane describes them as a hairy pick and mix, with both human, acrylic and cat hair filling the tempting wraps. Hair, for Jane, can describe a composite body or being. The queer logic of gifting this pluraled hair reminded her of the street hair she collects images of. Hair which has been lost and forgotten. So quoted from Jane, "This hair may have been violently pulled or been left behind in an emergency like a lizard's tail, but I prefer to think of this hair as being exuberantly lost, joyfully, maybe drunkenly, let down, tossed onto the pavement in a dramatic reveal." More recently, hair in Jane's practice has become exuberantly even more loud, as in this collage Scream for Me Glasgow from last year. It's a tribute to the beautiful hair of the young Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, and the younger still Spells Topping, Jane's cat, with Spells donating her hair for Jane to use as a cosy anchoring nest in the work. These beautiful, lush animals, and she's referring to Bruce Dickinson here, are hairy, leather-clad, demonstrative, ebullient, screaming queens in Jane's eyes. And finally, in this mini hair series, an ongoing work by Kelly Lloyd, an artist and lecturer at the University of Reading. She describes Hair Club as an interdisciplinary research-based initiative whose work is centred around the multivalent topic of hair and culture. Co-founded by 3 graduates of the School of Art in the Institute of Chicago, including Kelly, alongside Suzanne Gold and Mikhail Lynn Shimate. So in a sense, we've gone full circle here. Hair Club is, of course, not just a platform for discussing hairstyling and hair only. It's approached as a queer material that draws in making, thinking, storying through all the cultural, individual and political aspects of hair, beauty, ageing, class, ethnicity, and it enables things to be said and thought that might not manifest otherwise. So there's a little bit more hair to come, but this is now some of my work. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First is a film, and then a drawing project, a sort of extended drawing project. So this is a film titled All Rise. It's a moving image work that explores acts of imitation across species. In many ways, it's formed directly from my travelling companions, from approaches to acting and mimesis that have developed over many years. It's dominated by a soundscape of copies. All the animal sounds that you're about to hear in a clip are made by humans, and all the music and the sound of mechanical reproduction equipment, such as printing machines, is produced by animals. Key collaborators were students and staff from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and from the Perdicamp Emotional Method of Acting. Students in their first year of acting school trained to become various animals in partnership with London Zoo, learning a technique developed from Rudolf Laban. So the clip I'm about to play is of them practicing to be animals, chosen for them. So often if you had a kind of fast, quick-witted student, they would be given a tortoise. They were often given something that was the opposite of their own bodily mechanics, and they had to try and inhabit and sleep and eat and be this animal. So I'll play a little clip from here. So this could go horribly wrong. So I've got to kind of come out. Ooh, yeah. I've got to come out, I've got to go in. Is it full screen sort of thing? So you get a little impression of that from there. And you can see that, oh, where's that? That's the wrong one. There. We're back. Yeah. So you get a little impression of it from there, but you can see the whole film on my website if you want to have a look at it. So this is a tortoise, just to give you an idea of who's trying to play who. A meerkat. This was a very, very good impression of a silver-backed gorilla. So it's a kind of, a very slow form of acting. You're hardly there, but you have to sort of exude power, and this girl was very, very good at it. A toucan. And just to remind you of the film, so the film format, so you've got these two sides, the possibility of, it's like a sort of a double screen video, but it was within a single screen. So you can have different elements talking to each other across this sort of dark space. So the other, so the next piece of work I wanted to talk to you about, will this work? Yeah, it's going to work. I think it might work. So just to finish on that last piece of work, so it's not to Isabel Weidner and Corey Farr, but the film brings together an assembly of where it no longer matters what exactly is human and what is animal. The two occupy the same place, creating a commons within which mimetic behaviour becomes a sort of means to live. So now I wanted to play a short video of Coco the gorilla, which I'm sure one of you have come across, who was taught sign language. She was kept in captivity all her life. She was taught to sign and to therefore speak to you. And she addressed the COP21 climate change conference in Paris in 2014, where she had been taught a speech to warn humans to protect nature and protect the planet. So it's quite a traumatic video, I always find, just a bit of a spoiler. It's difficult to watch. It seems a bleak place to arrive at when we're teaching animals to say what it is we should be doing and we're not listening to them, and we know it from the start. So this is a piece of footage that I've been working with now for many years. I'll just play it. Oh, no, I've done it again, sorry. I think we only need that one once. How can I just do that? That way. Oh, that works, okay. So quite a difficult piece of footage on so many levels. There's an awful lot we could say about what you've just seen. So I spent an awful long time thinking about how I could work with it. I was struck by how sort of the embodied damage that it caused me watching it. But I decided in the end to learn what Coco had been taught to sign. So I learnt her signs, and I rehearsed them over and over again in the studio until I'd learnt them completely. I became the gorilla in a sense. So this is the sign, man stupid. And obviously it's very literal. I was struggling with ways to think about translating something that is deeply embodied into something that is also possible to convey, possible to represent, and how to get those two almost contradictory of modes to work together. And so I began this way. These are very large-scale drawings. They're bigger than the gorilla itself. so twins, you know, they've been doing the different signs. And then when I got to the one of the signs, which was about where she sort of didn't seem to stay on script, or added a bit of the script for her, of her own, where she was talking about flowers and smells, which had absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the message. Something in the drawing started to kind of separate. You ended up with these sort of individual areas within the drawing. And from there, holes started to, so the bulk's still there. I still had the memory of the bulk of her sitting, you know, this wide base that gorillas have. It's all kind of low slung. So anybody in the acting school has to play a gorilla. You have to get that weight low down. You know, that's where it was. And it all started to sort of take on this sort of slightly sort of these vacant holes, this sort of difficulty with language, where language is inadequate, as we talked about earlier. And it all starts to drop out and become complicated. And eventually I ended up with drawings that looked a bit like that. And from there I started to work small again, to think about the signs, to rehearse them. So again and again I would go into the studio and draw sea nature. This is all sea nature actually, this series. So sea is obviously that, nature's down here. It's a difficult thing to draw. And again, as I started to draw them, they started to articulate almost as signs of their own. It was almost as if a kind of new language was developing between me and this gorilla. They started to fold and hang and drop. They started to appear doubly still. And they took up different sort of spatial areas in the paper. And this led to the work that I'm working on now. I've got one happening in the studio. It's called Traumatic Objects. So it more or less borrows this weight, the bulk, the shapes that I know so well, but it's translated into colour now. There's kind of there's something very different going on. And when you look up closely, you'll see the kind of ridiculous detail, really, on the drawings. They take about a year to do each. And there's underpainting, which is done very quickly, and then there's this kind of this work with pens over the top that undoes what's underneath, so it doesn't follow the patterns of what's underneath. It's almost trying to take the drawings in a different direction. This is another one, and you can see all the kind of dribbles and sort of little galaxies of marks that are starting to appear, that are kind of moving away from animal fur or anything that might resemble where it came from, really. And this is the last one I've got to show, which is taken on kind of very different elemental marks. It's a sort of virus feeling about it when you see it up close, or scales, or fire. They've become very planetary. And as a result of that, they've ended up in this, you know, for some context, in this book, Planetary Realism, which I've got a copy of here if you want to have a look at it. It's literally just very recently been launched, but it's looking at the drawings alongside other artists who are engaging in some way with planetary realism. So I'm sort of at the end here. This is the book that I've got here. So here you're going to the bar later to support the course here. If you want to support the students at GSA, then this is what we do. We sell these books, and that goes back into a bursary for them. So none of it comes to us, it just goes straight back to the students. These are a couple of the bursary holders that we had. They're both undergraduate students, a painter and a sculptor. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.